After decades of giving my children everything I had, my time, my money, my love, they finally showed their true colors. They wanted to take it all, to lock me away and control what was mine. But what they didn't expect was that the fragile old man they thought they could manipulate would turn the tables on them. The tables have turned, and now, with my own hands, I'll take back what's mine. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I paused outside the kitchen doorway, my heart thudding dully in my chest. Their voices drifted from around the corner, low and urgent, unaware of my presence just a few feet away. "I'm telling you, we need to get Dad to sign those papers tonight," Julie insisted, her tone edged with a sharp impatience I'd never heard her use in my presence. "Every day we wait is a risk." A heavy silence, then my son Kevin spoke, sounding hesitant. "Maybe we should give him a little more time. He seemed fragile today." Fragile? I held my breath. At 72, I moved a bit slower, sure, but I hadn't thought of myself as fragile. My grip tightened on the doorframe as I leaned in. A third voice, my daughter Susan, cut through the hush. "He'll never agree if we give him time to think. We have to push while he's still feeling guilty about being a burden." A burden. The word stabbed through me, cold and precise. Mark, my son-in-law, let out an exasperated snort. "He isn't going to hand over control of his money just because we ask nicely. That's why we have the power of attorney ready. We get him to sign it tonight. Once it's done, it's done." My stomach lurched. Power of attorney. Control of his money. I felt the blood rushing in my ears as I realized exactly what they were planning. They wanted me to sign away my life, my finances, my house, my independence, into their hands. In that moment, hiding in the shadows of my own son's hallway, I knew my children were betraying me in the most personal, painful way imaginable. I forced myself to take a slow, silent breath. I couldn't stumble in there now, not reeling with hurt and fury. I needed to gather myself. Carefully, I backed away from the doorway before they noticed I was there. My heart was hammering so violently I was sure they'd hear it. I retreated down the hall toward the living room, the cheerful clatter of dishes from dinner unable to mask the dark conversation I just overheard. In the living room, I sank onto the edge of the sofa. A family photo stared back at me from the mantel, a portrait from 10 years ago. My late wife Margaret and I smiled in the center, proud and unsuspecting, while a younger Kevin and Susan flanked us with grins of their own. We looked so happy. So whole. My hands trembled slightly as I straightened my glasses and tried to compose myself. I needed to think clearly. How had it come to this? Just an hour ago, I'd arrived at Kevin's house for what I thought was a simple family dinner. Kevin and Julie had invited me earlier in the week, insisting it had been too long since we all got together. They'd even managed to get Susan and Mark to drive in from out of town for the evening. It felt special, a rare occasion to have both my children, their spouses, and my granddaughter under one roof. I'd been touched by the effort. Now I saw the truth, it had all been orchestrated for this. A trap disguised as a family reunion. Looking back, there had been subtle signs of an ulterior motive, little things I dismissed at the time. On Tuesday, Susan had called me out of the blue, her voice sugar-sweet, to ask how I was feeling living alone and if I needed help with anything. It was an unusual call, my daughter loved me, but she wasn't one to check in just for my health. And yesterday, Kevin had shown up at my house unannounced with a box of my favorite pastries, making small talk while subtly glancing around my study. I remembered how he casually asked if I'd ever considered downsizing or if handling my finances was getting difficult in my old age. I chuckled, assuming he was just concerned. But each exchange now slotted into place as part of a larger, nefarious puzzle. Even tonight, during dinner, there had been hints. Emily, my 8-year-old granddaughter, had tugged on my sleeve right before we sat down. "Grandpa, are you really moving away to a special home?" she had asked, her big brown eyes serious in her small face. I'd been startled. What do you mean, sweetheart? I'm not moving anywhere. Julie had appeared then, laughing too brightly as she scooped Emily into her arms. Emily's been reading stories about grandparents who go to fancy retirement homes with swimming pools, she explained quickly, avoiding my eyes as she carried the child off to wash her hands. She got a silly idea stuck in her head, that's all. At the time I'd let it go, though Emily's innocent question left a nagging worry. A special home? It sounded eerily specific. But the moment passed as the family gathered around the dinner table, chatting about trivial things. I noticed other oddities through the meal. Susan and Mark kept exchanging loaded glances whenever the conversation drifted toward my health or the house. Julie was unusually attentive, urging second helpings onto my plate and refilling my glass the instant it was half empty. Kevin, usually jovial, seemed distracted, checking the time repeatedly as if on a schedule. By dessert, anxiety pressed on my sternum. It felt like I was a guest at some staged performance where everyone knew their lines except me. Still, I never imagined the cruelty that truly lay behind their behavior, until I heard it firsthand just minutes ago. Now, sitting alone in the living room, I tried to steady my breathing. Through the doorway, I could hear them still murmuring in the kitchen, though I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to, I'd heard enough. They planned to present me with a power of attorney document, likely giving them full control over my bank accounts, investments, medical decisions, maybe even the deed to my house. They would probably spin it as a convenience for me, a way to help take care of things so I wouldn't have to worry in my old age. In reality, it was a ploy to seize everything I had worked my entire life to build. They wanted my inheritance, their inheritance, now, while I was still breathing. And to get it, they were willing to manipulate me, betray me, and even lock me away in some nursing facility. A wave of nausea rolled through me. This betrayal cut far deeper than any ordinary deception. These were my children, my own flesh and blood, the babies I had rocked to sleep in my arms, the teenagers I had guided through heartbreaks and homework, the adults I had supported in every way I knew how. And their spouses, whom I welcomed into our family with open arms, whom I treated like my own. I closed my eyes, Margaret's gentle smile in the framed photo filling my mind. She had adored our kids with a fierce love, and she'd been so proud of the family we'd built. If she were alive to see this, what would it do to her? A memory surfaced, Margaret in the hospital bed, just days before she passed 3 years ago. We had shooed everyone out of the room to have a moment alone. With her thin hand in mine, she'd fixed me with that penetrating gaze of hers that still held so much life. "Frank," she had whispered, voice papery but firm, "promise me you'll take care of yourself. Don't let anyone take advantage of you. You're so good, sometimes too good for your own good." I'd hushed her, brushing away tears. "No one's taking advantage, Maggie. The kids just want me to be happy." She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "Just, be careful. Especially if I'm not here. I worry." A fit of coughing cut her off, and I'd kissed her forehead, telling her not to worry about anything. At the time I thought it was the fever talking, her anxieties flaring with her illness. But Margaret had always been perceptive. Perhaps she'd seen the seeds of this in our children or their spouses that I, blinded by love, refused to see. "I should have listened to you," I murmured under my breath, eyes still closed. In my mind, I imagined her sitting beside me as she often used to, her hand resting warmly over mine. What would Margaret advise now? Probably to keep calm and think, to not act rashly in anger. To protect myself, but also to remember they were our children, however awful their actions. A floorboard creaked down the hall, jolting me back to the present. They were moving, maybe coming to find me. I had to act, now. Wiping a hand over my face, I stood and steadied myself. I'd learned long ago in business that showing your cards too early can cost you the game. And this was one game I could not afford to lose, my very freedom depended on it. I took a slow breath, drawing on every bit of my composure honed from decades of negotiating deals and managing a company. By the time Kevin stepped into the living room, I had schooled my features into an expression of mild fatigue and confusion, as if I hadn't just had my world upended in the next room. "There you are, Dad," Kevin said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The others trailed in behind him, Julie clutching a manila folder so tightly her knuckles were white. Susan hovered near the back, half hidden behind Mark's broad form. I noticed how their eyes flicked anxiously between me and one another. They were nervous. "Good. Sorry," I said quietly. "I just needed to rest for a moment. I guess I'm more tired than I realized." I let a note of weariness creep into my voice and raised a hand to rub my temple for effect. Julie leapt forward. "Are you feeling all right, Frank?" she asked sweetly. "Do you have a headache? We can get you some aspirin." I waved her off gently. No. I think it's just been a long day. Perhaps I should head home." Across the room, I saw Susan's eyes widen in panic. She stepped out from behind Mark. "Already?" "But Dad, we wanted to have a family discussion, remember?" Her attempt at casualness fell flat, the pitch of her voice was too high. "Yes," Mark added, smiling too broadly. "Just a little chat now that dinner's over. Why don't you sit, and we can all be comfortable?" He gestured to the sofa. I didn't move. "I really am not feeling up to it tonight," I said, managing a faint, apologetic smile. "Maybe we can do it another time, kids. I'm sure it can wait a few days." "Dad, please." Kevin's tone was soft, but there was desperation lurking at the edges. He took a step toward me, exchanging a quick look with Julie, who still clutched that folder. "It's important. We promised we'd talk about, some future planning. It won't take long, honestly." My gaze drifted to the folder in Julie's hands. She followed my look and unconsciously pulled it tighter against herself, as if afraid I might snatch it away. A hot spike of anger flared in me, anger that they presumed they could manage me like a senile old fool. I quashed the anger down. "Not yet." I gave a slow shake of my head and attempted a regretful expression. "I'm sorry. I'm really not feeling well after all. Perhaps something I ate. I think it'd be best if I go home and get some rest." I started toward the door, grabbing my coat from the arm of a chair. My knees felt unsteady, but I kept my stride even. "Dad," Susan protested, moving as if to block my path. I stopped and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Another time, honey," I said softly. The term of endearment tasted bitter on my tongue, but it had the desired effect. Susan blinked, uncertainty playing across her face. In her eyes, I could almost see the calculus performing. Would making a scene now jeopardize their plan? Perhaps they thought they could regroup and try again tomorrow or next week if they played along tonight. Julie, however, was not giving up so easily. "Frank, wait," she said, voice dripping concern but cracking just at the end. "We really should talk about this now, while we're all together. We might not get another chance when everyone's available." I paused by the coffee table, turning to face them. My eyes darted between my two children and their spouses, taking them in, the four conspirators standing together, tensely united in purpose. My gaze landed on my granddaughter, little Emily, who had come back into the room clutching the stuffed rabbit I'd bought her last Christmas. She stood a few feet behind her mother Julie, her expression puzzled and worried as she looked at the adults. That sight nearly undid me. Emily, with her innocent questions and open love, was stuck in the middle of this ugliness she couldn't possibly understand. I felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever happened between me and my children, I would make sure Emily and any other grandchildren were cared for, without their parents' interference. I forced myself to smile gently at Emily, as if nothing were wrong. Then I addressed the room. "I appreciate that you all want to discuss something important. And we will. But I'm not at my best tonight, and I want to be fully alert and rested for any serious conversation. You deserve that from me, and I deserve it from myself. My voice had taken on a firmer timbre on that last sentence, and I saw Mark frown slightly. Good. I softened it again, turning to Kevin. Son, how about we get together later this week? We can sit down properly, just us, and go over whatever's on your minds. I promise I'll listen. Kevin opened his mouth, but Julie spoke first. Why not tomorrow? She blurted. Her smile was painfully strained now. We can come to your house, say late morning. I can bring brunch. We'll keep it informal. She was scrambling. They all were. Likely terrified that if I walked out that door now, I might never sign their precious documents. Tomorrow morning. So soon. I feigned uncertainty, then gave a small nod. All right. I suppose that's fine. Brunch sounds nice. Susan's shoulders slumped a fraction in relief. Mark even attempted a genial grin. Perfect. We'll swing by around 11, he confirmed. That's fine, I said. I turned to pick up my car keys from the side table, hiding my face for a moment. In that moment, rage and pain contorted my expression, but when I faced them again I was composed. Now, I'll be off. Thank you for dinner, it was delicious, truly. I bent and gave Emily a quick kiss on the top of her head. Her hair smelled of baby shampoo and innocence. My throat tightened. Good night, sweetheart. Thank you for playing with Grandpa today. Good night, she whispered, looking up at me uncertainly. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Emmy, I managed to say, my voice thick. Over her head I locked eyes with Julie, who looked away, biting her lip. Kevin walked me to the door. The others trailed behind silently, probably unsure what to say or do. My son opened the front door for me, the cool night air washing over us. You sure you're okay to drive? He asked quietly. There was genuine concern in his tone, maybe even a flicker of guilt in his eyes when he finally met my gaze. It hurt to see that hint of the old Kevin, my caring boy, because I knew it was overshadowed by his next words. We just want what's best for you, Dad. You know that, right? I stared at him for a long moment on the threshold. My first instinct was to shout, to ask how he could do this to me. But instead I heard myself say, I know you think you do. Before he could parse that, I stepped out into the night. I'll see you all tomorrow. Behind me, I heard the others murmur subdued farewells. I did not turn around. I couldn't. If I looked back and saw the lie on their faces, faces I loved, I might lose my composure. I reached my car and got in, my hands gripping the wheel. In the rearview mirror, I caught a final glimpse of the four of them gathered in the doorway, watching me. Their expressions were a mix of worry and relief. They thought they'd successfully delayed me just a few hours. They likely believed they could still salvage their scheme in the morning. They had no idea the storm that was coming. As I drove away, the events of the evening replayed in my mind in a chaotic whirl. The farther I got from my son's house, the more the shock gave way to a deep, seething anger and an even deeper hurt. How dare they? How dare they treat me like a senile old burden to be disposed of once I'd outlived my usefulness? The betrayal hit me in waves, alternating between hot rage and cold sadness. A red light made me stop at an empty intersection. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I took that moment to gather myself once more. I inhaled slowly, counting to 4, then exhaled just as slowly. An old trick I'd used during tense business negotiations to stay calm. My reflection in the windshield looked back at me, drawn and grief-stricken. I barely recognized that face. I thought of the countless nights after Margaret died that I had thanked God for my children, for family to give life meaning despite my loneliness. They had been my anchor against despair. Now that anchor had been cut loose, leaving me adrift. But not for long. The light turned green. I pressed down on the accelerator, a new resolve hardening within me. If my own children and their spouses intended to double-cross me, I would show them that I was not the helpless victim they imagined. They expected a weak, compliant old man. They would instead meet a man who had built a successful engineering firm from nothing, who had weathered recessions and cutthroat competitors, who had the sharpness and cunning earned over a lifetime. Yes, I had stepped back from work and I moved at a gentler pace now, but I was still me. Frank Walker wasn't dead yet, not by a long shot. And I would be damned if I let my legacy, the fruits of all those decades of labor and love, fall into the hands of ingrates who plotted to steal it behind my back. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my home, the home I built with Margaret 40 years ago, a plan was already beginning to form. The house loomed warmly in the glow of the porch light. This was the house where both my children were born, where every scratch on the wall and every flower in the garden had a memory attached. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the familiar outline of the gable roof and the big bay window of the living room. A fresh wave of pain hit me as I realized, if Kevin and Susan had their way, I'd be leaving this house soon against my will, shuffled off to a home, and the place would be sold off and divided up like plunder. They'd erase the life Margaret and I built here for a quick payout. No. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I won't let that happen, I whispered into the empty car. My face in the rear view hardened with determination. I might have to leave this house, but it would be on my terms, not theirs. And they would never see a penny from it. I got out of the car and strode to my front door, adrenaline making me feel 20 years younger. Inside, the house was silent and still. I shut the door behind me and leaned on it for a moment, closing my eyes. Memories swirled around me in the quiet. I could almost hear echoes of laughter from holidays long past, smell Margaret's famous pot roast from the kitchen, feel the stampede of little feet, Kevin at age 6, chasing 4-year-old Susan down the hall while Margaret scolded playfully. I allowed myself a moment of mourning. In a way, I realized, my family as I knew it had died tonight. The trust, the love I believed in Violet, shattered in a few hushed sentences. I would never be able to look at my son or daughter the same way again. And that loss ached in a place deeper than any physical wound. But though they had broken my heart, they had not broken me. I pushed off from the door and stood up straight. There was work to do, my work. They thought I was fragile. They were about to see just how strong their fragile old man could be when cornered. First things first, I had to secure my assets before tomorrow. Who knew what they might try even overnight if they grew desperate? I wouldn't put it past Mark or Julie to attempt something rash like logging into my online bank, if they had somehow sneaked a password, or showing up here at dawn. I made my way to the study. The study was just off the main hall, and as I entered, I flicked on the light. The room sprang to life, warm wood paneling, my large mahogany desk, shelves lined with engineering textbooks and decades of family photo albums. In the corner, perched on a side table, was a formal portrait of Margaret, smiling in her favorite blue dress. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I crossed to the desk. "Don't worry, Maggie," I murmured, touching the frame lightly. "I know what I'm doing." I lowered myself into the leather chair and booted up my laptop. While it hummed awake, I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a bound ledger and a stack of file folders. Old-fashioned, maybe, but I had always kept meticulous paper records of my finances alongside the digital ones. As the computer screen glowed to life, I opened the ledger, flipping to the most recent pages. There, in neat columns, was the summary of my assets, a checking and savings with modest balances, a sizable brokerage and IRA, a paid-off house valued near $1 million, a small lake cabin, a life insurance policy, and a handful of other valuables. I ran my finger down the list, calculation and clarity returning to my mind with each item. The nest egg was sizable, certainly more than my children realized, since I'd been modest about my wealth. I knew they expected a paid-off house and perhaps a few $100,000 in the bank. They had no idea I'd invested so well or that I'd been quietly growing those accounts for years. The thought gave me grim satisfaction. They thought they were about to help themselves to my life's work, but they didn't even know the full extent of it. Of course, they wouldn't get any of it if I had my way. But I needed to move smartly. Tomorrow at 11, they'd descend for brunch and try to get me to sign the power of attorney, POA. Once signed, that document would theoretically give them legal authority to manage, which in their case meant steal, my money and property. I wouldn't sign it, obviously. But simply refusing and confronting them might not be enough. They could try again later or find other means, like trying to have me declared incompetent. This needed to end decisively. To do that, I had to take away either their opportunity or their incentive, preferably both. If they arrived to find that their plan was already made impossible, what could they do? I tapped the desk thoughtfully. If I removed key assets from my name or put them out of reach, a POA would be useless or at least far less effective. The house was the big one. Nearly $1 million of value that they clearly had designs on. I recalled Susan's voice on the phone with Mark. The house alone is worth almost $1 million. They were practically salivating over it. What if it were no longer mine for them to take? If I sold the house, the cash could be stashed somewhere only I controlled. And if I moved out, I also removed the immediate leverage they had of threatening to put me in a home. I'd already be out of their reach, in a place of my choosing. My eyes landed on the phone sitting on my desk. I picked it up and dialed a number from memory. It rang only once at this late hour before going to voicemail. Of course, it was nearly midnight. But I didn't need to talk to my real estate agent neighbor, Linda, in person. I just needed to plant a seed. When the tone beeped, I spoke quietly but clearly. Linda, it's Frank Walker. Sorry to call so late. I've had a sudden development and I need to sell my house as soon as possible, yesterday, if it were possible. Please call me first thing in the morning. It's urgent. I hung up. Linda lived 3 houses down and had been a realtor for 30 years. We weren't extremely close, but she liked me and respected Margaret. I knew she'd be shocked and full of questions tomorrow, but she'd also leap into action. And she could be discreet if I asked. I suspected she might relish an off-market quick sale challenge. Next, the accounts. If I sold the house, that money needed to be protected. Perhaps a new bank account at a different bank, one my kids had no knowledge of, and maybe even in a trust or business name rather than mine personally. That would complicate any POA's reach. I made another quick decision. First thing tomorrow, I'd withdraw a significant amount of cash from my current bank accounts, just in case they somehow convinced a bank to freeze things with a copy of the POA, if they forged my signature, for instance. But if I drained the accounts first, the POA would be a hollow victory. It was drastic, but then so was being betrayed by your own children. My laptop had finally fully booted, and I logged into my online banking. The balances glowed on screen. I resisted the urge to transfer everything right this second. Large sudden movements could raise automated red flags at the bank. Instead, I scheduled an appointment at my local branch for tomorrow morning as soon as they opened, 9 a.m. I'd go in person and handle it directly with the bank manager, an old acquaintance. Next, I opened a browser and researched financial institutions known for privacy and swift new account setups. After a few minutes, I found one, an independent community bank across town that touted private banking for discerning clients. Perfect. I filled out an online inquiry form requesting an urgent appointment. I sat back, feeling a cautious sense of progress. It was past midnight now, and exhaustion tugged at me. But my mind was too wired to rest yet. I opened another desk drawer and pulled out a thick file labeled Estate. Inside were copies of my current will, the deed to the house, insurance details, and all those things. My will, last updated right after Margaret died, left everything equally to Kevin and Susan, with a modest trust for Emily's education. At the time, it seemed natural and fair. Now, the thought of them inheriting anything from me made me sick. That will had to change, and fast. Not only as revenge but as protection, if something happened to me, my heart was thundering an awful lot these days. I didn't want them rewarded for their behavior. I wanted my estate to bypass them entirely, maybe to the grandchildren, with safeguards, or charity. I'd need a lawyer to draft a new will quickly. Perhaps my old attorney, Mr. Donahue, could squeeze me in tomorrow or Monday at the latest. He was semi-retired but owed me a favor. I once loaned him my vintage Mustang for his anniversary. I scribbled a note on a pad, called Donahue New Will ASAP. As I wrote, my hand shook with a mix of anger and heartache. Rewriting my will to cut out my own children, something I never imagined I'd do. Yet I felt no doubt or hesitation about it now. They had made their choice when they plotted to steal my life's work and lock me away. Actions have consequences. I closed the estate file and tapped it on the desk, my mind drifting back to the past, seeking any clues I'd missed. When had my children become these people capable of such cold treachery? Had it been gradual, little acts of entitlement growing year by year, or was it always there, hidden until opportunity arose? I recalled Kevin's early adulthood. He was always the charmer, more interested in quick success than hard work. I indulged him perhaps more than I should. He tried a few career paths, salesman, then day trader, never sticking, occasionally asking for loans that Margaret and I always provided. When he met Julie and they married, I was relieved that she seemed grounded. She worked as an accountant, was organized. For a time, they settled down. I helped them with a down payment on their first house. Then I helped again when they wanted to start a business flipping houses, which failed swiftly in a market downturn. Each time, they were grateful. Until the next request. Margaret's warning in the hospital had partly been about Kevin's pattern of requests. She did worry we were enabling him. Then there was Susan, my brilliant, headstrong daughter. She'd been academically gifted, became a lawyer, married a fellow attorney, Mark. I was so proud at her law school graduation, I paid for it in full, refusing to let her drown in student debt. Margaret and I considered it an investment in her bright future. Susan had thanked us, tears in her eyes, one of the rare times she'd been so openly emotional. I truly believed that gratitude was sincere. But a law career and marriage brought expensive tastes. Mark liked the high life, flashy cars, luxury vacations. They both worked hard, but they spent harder. And when their twin boys were born prematurely and one had complications, the medical bills piled up. They never explicitly asked me for money, that time I offered first, covering what insurance did not. Perhaps that's when a boundary shifted. A couple years ago, I helped them again when Mark was briefly unemployed, something hush-hush about leaving his firm under murky circumstances. Another sum to cover their mortgage for a few months. They accepted it with relief but not much fanfare. By then, maybe they saw it as almost expected. Line after line of my financial records glared up at me, each entry a testament to how I'd cared for them, how I'd put their needs above my own. And now these very entries felt like wounds. All those sacrifices recorded in my ledger, down payments, business bailouts, tuition checks, medical bills, mortgage payments. We had always given, never asking for anything in return beyond our children's well-being. And now these same children repaid me by planning to slit my throat financially the first chance they got. I couldn't help the tears that blurred my vision. My throat tightened. In the silence of my study, I allowed myself to cry, just for a minute or two, for the death of the illusion that my children loved me as selflessly as I loved them. When the tears subsided, a steely calm remained. I gently closed the ledger. Enough. I had to finish preparing for tomorrow. My eyes flicked to Margaret's portrait again. They'll learn, Maggie, I whispered, my voice hoarse. I'll make sure they learn what happens when you betray someone who's given you everything. The next morning dawned cold and bright. I hadn't slept more than an hour, dozing upright in the study armchair. But adrenaline carried me forward. By 8:30 a.m., I was showered, shaved, and dressed in a crisp navy blazer, gray slacks, and polished leather shoes. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and saw not an old victim, but a dignified man on a mission. Before leaving the house, I methodically gathered important items. The estate file and ledger, tucked into my briefcase. The spare house keys that I suspected Kevin and Susan still secretly had, I found them hanging on our old family key rack and pocketed them. They wouldn't be using those again. Margaret's jewelry box and a few small valuables, I placed them in a locking case. If I ended up away from the house, I didn't want those left behind. Finally, I took the framed photo of Margaret from the mantel. I held it a moment, absorbing strength from her familiar smile, then set it carefully in the case as well. By 9 a.m., I was at the bank, speaking privately with the branch manager. I calmly but firmly requested substantial withdrawals and transfers, citing estate planning as my reason. Though surprised, Mr. Evans facilitated my requests. In short order, I had withdrawn a significant amount in cash and arranged the rest of my funds to be transferred or secured where my children could never reach them. I left the bank carrying a cashier's check for a large sum in my jacket pocket and a satchel with $20,000 in $100 bills. It felt strange having so much cash on hand, but oddly comforting, like a safety net I could actually touch. Next, I met Linda at a coffee shop just after 9:30. She arrived with eyes wide. I gave her a vague story about urgent health reasons forcing me to move. Shocked but understanding, she agreed to find a cash buyer immediately, even if it meant pricing below market for a quick sale. Linda promised to handle everything quietly and get back to me as soon as she had an offer. By 10:30 a.m., I was back at the house, and Linda was already lining up 2 interested buyers to view it by this afternoon. I gave her permission to use the lockbox and show the place even if I wasn't present. She was efficient, I trusted her to handle it. Meanwhile, at home I had more to do. Only half an hour remained until my children were due to arrive with their cursed brunch and poison papers. I went through the house like a man possessed. In the living room, I pulled open the drawer of the china cabinet where I kept a small revolver, unloaded, a keepsake from my father's service days. I had no intention of using it, but I didn't want it available to anyone else either. I placed it in my briefcase. No accidents. Next, I found the key to the liquor cabinet and locked it. Not that I expected a violent confrontation, but if things got heated, I didn't want Mark, who had a temper, grabbing a whiskey bottle and doing something stupid. I headed upstairs to my bedroom. In the closet stood a large suitcase. I yanked it out and started tossing in some clothes, toiletries, personal documents from the bedroom safe, just the essentials I'd need for a short-term stay elsewhere. It struck me as I packed that I was preparing as if I might not be coming back here for a while. My heart twisted. This was still my home, legally anyway, for a bit longer. But I knew in my gut that after today, it would never truly feel like mine again. Not after whatever showdown was about to happen. At 10:55 a.m., I finished taping an envelope to the inside of my front door, eye level, impossible to miss. My hands shook slightly as I smoothed the tape. Inside the envelope was a multi-page letter I had stayed up most of the night drafting, revising, perfecting. It was, essentially, my final message to my children. Part explanation, part condemnation, part farewell. They would read it when they walked in and realized I wasn't there in person. Yes, I had decided not to meet them face to face. Cowardly? Perhaps. But I knew if I looked into their eyes, I might falter. Or worse, explode in rage. The letter would speak for me, with all the measured thought and pain I'd poured into it. And I wouldn't have to listen to their immediate reactions, their lies or excuses. Instead, I would watch from afar, witness their reckoning without engaging directly. For that, I had prepared one more tool. Yesterday, during one of my few quiet moments, I had ordered something online with overnight shipping. The package arrived early this morning, left on my porch at 7 a.m. From that package, I retrieved a small device that looked like a phone charger. In reality, it was a tiny Wi-Fi camera. Modern technology is amazing, this little thing could stream live video and audio to my phone. I had tested it already in various spots. Now I plugged it into the wall outlet across from the front door, angling it just so among a cluster of real charger cables and lamp cords. Anyone glancing would think it was just powering some gadget. It had a perfect view of the entryway and living room beyond, including the spot where I now hung a sheet of paper marked "Read Me" on the envelope taped to the door. Stepping back, I opened the camera app on my phone and viewed the feed, crystal clear, showing the whole scene from a corner perspective. It would do nicely. Outside, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My stomach clenched. 11 o'clock on the dot. Overachievers. Quickly, I crossed to the front door and double-locked it. I had already slid the deadbolt an hour ago, and now I gave the knob lock a firm twist for good measure. If they still had those old spare keys, they'd find them useless. Not wanting to exit out the front, I didn't particularly desire an awkward encounter on my own lawn. I hurried to the back door off the kitchen. There, I stepped out into the backyard and quietly closed the door behind me. I latched the tall wooden gate of the backyard fence as I left, another small barrier to slow them down if they got any ideas. Heart hammering, I made my way around the block to a spot where I'd parked my car out of sight. From this vantage, partially hidden by a neighbor's hedge, I had a line of sight to my house without being obvious. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app again, just in time. On screen, I saw Kevin's SUV pull into my driveway. He and Julie emerged from the front, and I noticed they were dressed up a bit, Julie in a nice dress, Kevin in a crisp shirt. Brunch theater, I thought with disgust. A moment later, Susan's car arrived and parked at the curb. She and Mark got out carrying covered dishes. How domestic of them. I even saw a bouquet of flowers in Susan's hand. The audacity, trying to appear like loving children coming to brighten their old dad's day. I watched as they converged and walked up the path to my front door, chatting with each other. My phone camera had no trouble picking up their conversation as they came into range. "He sounded fine on the phone this morning," Mark was saying. "I think he bought it." "He just needs a little push," Julie replied in a hushed tone. "We'll get him comfortable, feed him, then bring up the papers casually after coffee." Susan balanced the casserole dish in one hand and rang the doorbell with the other. They waited. I could see them start to frown when no one answered. Kevin stepped forward and tried the knob. It rattled but held. He reached into his pocket, pulled out what looked like a key, and tried it. I smirked. Yes, the old spare I once gave him for emergencies. It wouldn't do him any good now. On camera, Kevin's face registered confusion as the key failed to turn. He tried again, harder. "That's odd," I heard him mutter. "Dad never changes the locks." "Well, he must have," Julie said, a worried edge creeping into her voice. "Try the back," Mark suggested. "Maybe he's outside and left it unlocked." Kevin nodded and jogged off the porch toward the side gate. A moment later I saw him on the camera feed passing by the living room window outside. Of course, the back door was locked too. I'd made sure every possible entrance was secured. In their haste, they hadn't yet peered through the sidelights by the front door. If they had, they'd see the envelope. But now they were all off balance, circling the house. Finally, after a minute or two, they regrouped at the front. Susan pulled out her phone, presumably to call me, while Julie cupped her hands to the front window glass and peered in. "Dad!" Julie called, knocking sharply on the window. "Are you in there?" "It's us." No answer, naturally. I had turned my ringer off. I saw on the screen that Susan was indeed calling my number now, and frowning when it went straight to voicemail. "There's no car in the garage," Mark pointed out, stepping back on the porch. He looked uneasy now. "Do you think he's okay?" "His phone isn't even ringing," Susan said softly. Worry laced her tone, but whether it was worry for my well-being or worry that their prize had escaped, I couldn't say. Kevin, back on the porch, had now noticed the envelope taped to the inside of the glass of the door. The blinds were open just enough. "What's that?" he murmured. He motioned for Julie to look. Together they squinted. Though they couldn't reach it, it was inside. They could read the big words, "Read me," facing them. "That's Dad's handwriting," Julie said slowly. "Why would he?" Kevin trailed off. "Is there a key under the mat or something?" Mark asked impatiently. He tried to jiggle a front window, but it was firmly shut. My children were realizing they were being intentionally kept out. I could see the dawning confusion and fear on their faces. "Dad!" Kevin raised his voice, knocking loudly on the door itself now. "Dad, are you in there? Let us in." When no response came, Susan bit her lip, then decisively reached into the mailbox beside the door and pulled out a stack of unopened letters and flyers. With a quick motion, she slid something flat and metallic out from underneath the pile, a credit card or maybe a thin key card, and began jimmying it at the door jamb, clearly attempting to slip the latch. I almost laughed. Where had she learned that trick? Perhaps in law school or from some client. Regardless, it wouldn't work on a deadbolt door. But she kept trying for a few futile seconds. Finally, exasperated, Mark gently pulled her back. "This is ridiculous. He invites us and then what, locks us out?" Julie's face had drained of color. "Do you think he found out?" She didn't finish the sentence, but her hand drifted to the manila folder in her tote bag, the very documents they intended me to sign. Kevin ran a hand through his hair. "How could he have? We didn't tell anyone." "Unless," he stopped, exchanging a glance with Julie. "Emily heard us talking last night. We'll see if they put it together that she might have warned me," I thought. But at the moment, they had another focus, the letter literally taped in front of them. "Maybe the note explains," Susan said. She stepped back and looked around, then marched to a nearby front window. With the point of her elbow and a grimace, she smashed the small decorative pane of glass in the lower corner. I flinched at the sound through my phone, and from down the street I faintly heard the glass break too. So much for not getting violent, my daughter had just broken into my house. If things weren't so serious, I might have smiled at her boldness. Susan carefully reached in and unlatched the window, then slid it up. It was a tight squeeze, too small for most adults, but slender, athletic Susan managed to worm halfway through, her business suit catching on the frame. Kevin and Mark helped maneuver her legs, and she tumbled inside with a thud. Moments later, the front door clicked open from within, and Susan appeared in view, unlocking it for the others. Her expression as she stood in the entryway was one of astonishment mingled with apprehension. The others piled in behind her, stepping over bits of broken glass. Now the camera had all four of them inside the house, just a few feet from the envelope I'd left. Julie was the first to gently lift it from where it was taped. The silence among them was profound as she opened the envelope with trembling fingers and unfolded the several pages of my letter. The next minutes were everything I had anticipated and more. They read the letter in tandem, huddled there by the door. Occasionally one would gasp or mutter an expletive, but mostly there was stunned silence as my words sank in. I had spelled out in plain language that I knew of their scheme. That I overheard them discussing putting me in a nursing home and taking my assets. That I was deeply wounded by their betrayal. That I had taken steps to protect myself and everything I owned from them effective immediately. I detailed some of those steps. The house was in the process of being sold for cash. By the time you read this, it may already be sold, I wrote, which was only a slight exaggeration. The proceeds of that sale, and all my funds, were now in a secure account only I could access. They would not be inheriting or taking my home or the money from it. I informed them I had moved out, to somewhere I'm respected and cared for, not merely tolerated, and that their keys would no longer work and their access to me was now solely on my terms. "You wanted to teach me how powerless I was by taking over my life," I had written in conclusion. Instead, I've taught you how powerless you are to take what I do not wish to give. I ended the letter not with love, as I might have in better times, but simply with a devastating truth, that I knew exactly how they repaid my decades of love, with treachery, and I hoped it was worth the cost, because they had lost more than just money. They had lost me. I hope the lesson was worth the price you paid. The second-to-last line read, a grim echo of words I once might have used when disciplining them as children, though never in such a context. Finally, I signed it, Dad. I watched them on the camera as the realization of what all this meant crashed over them. He sold the house. Julie's voice broke the silence first, high and disbelieving. She clutched the papers with white-knuckled hands. It says he sold the house for cash. He kept it all. That money was supposed to be our future. No. Maybe he's bluffing, Kevin said, though he sounded far from sure. He turned and looked around as if expecting to see everything already cleared out. But of course, much of the furniture and belongings were still there. I hadn't had time to empty it. It doesn't look empty, maybe he just says he sold it. It must be true, Susan breathed, scanning the letter again with eyes wide. He wouldn't lie about that. He has everything, we have nothing. Mark cursed under his breath and slapped the letter against his thigh. Power of attorney is useless if he's moved all the money already. Damn it. Kevin wandered into the living room a few paces, then sank onto the sofa as if his legs had given out. He's gone, he said quietly. His voice had lost its earlier edge, now trembling with an emotion I recognized as fear. Looking at him through the camera lens, I saw not a scheming middle-aged man, but a little boy who had just realized he was lost. This can't be real, Kevin continued, shaking his head slowly. What do we do now? We needed that money, he caught himself, but the words hung in the air. Susan's temper snapped. She rounded on him, eyes blazing. Needed it for what, Kevin? Huh? Because you and Julie, she practically spat her sister-in-law's name, couldn't live within your means. Because you blew through your savings on that stupid house flipping and expected Dad to bail you out again. Julie's eyes flashed with tears of fury. Don't you start with me, Susan. You're in the same damn boat. Or did you forget you begged Dad for money when Mark lost his job? Or all the other times he helped you? Mark bristled. Hey now, we've all been taking from him for years, Julie barreled on, voice rising. Why else do you think we even came up with this plan? None of us wanted to wait until he dies to get what's ours. Shut up, both of you, Kevin groaned suddenly, burying his face in his hands. Arguing isn't helping. A tense silence fell. I watched my children and their spouses, standing in my foyer amidst broken glass and scathing truth, momentarily at a loss. Susan shook her head, tears in her eyes. How could he do this to us? We're his family. Kevin looked around at the broken window, the letter trembling in Julie's grasp, the chaos of their own making. His shoulders sagged. We broke into our own father's house, when did we become these people, he muttered. A hush fell after that outburst. I watched my children stand in my living room, surrounded by the ghost of our once loving family, and fall apart. It was done. They had nothing left to scheme over, they had only recriminations and the hollow echo of what they'd lost. I felt a profound sadness mixing with the satisfaction of victory. There they were, my son, my daughter, and their partners. Once I imagined them as the future of our family's joy. Now, in winning against them, I'd effectively destroyed that future and severed those ties. The cost of justice was steep indeed. Finally, Mark broke the silence, his tone flat and tinged with panic. He said he's moved out, but not where. And he changed his phone or shut it off. He can't hide forever, Julie said quietly, wiping her streaked face. We'll find him. We'll talk to him, apologize maybe. This is all a misunderstanding, we can spin it, no. It was Kevin who interrupted, sounding defeated. He looked like the fight had drained out of him entirely. It's over, Julie. Don't you get it? He's made up his mind. He doesn't want to see us. Why do you think he didn't meet us here? He knew if he saw our faces he might not go through with it. He swallowed hard, his eyes unfocused. Dad's done with us. Those words, hearing my son say them, struck me deeply. Done with us. I had believed myself fully in the right, righteously cutting them off. And I was. But it still hurt like hell to accept that this was the end of my family as I knew it. I watched as my daughter sank into my old armchair, covering her face. Mark stood by, silent and stiff, eyes unfocused. Julie drifted to the sofa and sat next to Kevin, who barely acknowledged her. An air of despair hung over all of them. I'd seen enough. With trembling fingers, I tapped the button to stop the live feed. The app prompted me to save the recording of the last hour. I did, though I doubted I'd ever watch it again. Closing the app, I realized tears were rolling down my cheeks. I let them fall, bowing my head in the driver's seat of my parked car. My chest felt hollowed out and aching. It was a victory, but a hollow one. Necessary, just, and yet utterly heartbreaking. After a few minutes, I scrubbed my face with a handkerchief and took a deep breath. Through the hedge I saw my children trickling back outside, moving slowly, quietly. Not at all the confident conspirators who had arrived earlier. One by one, they got into their cars. Susan left first, speeding off with a squeal of tires, anger overtaking her sorrow, perhaps. Kevin and Julie lingered a moment by their SUV. I saw them embrace, her sobbing into his shoulder. He patted her back absently, then they too departed. Mark was last, locking my front door behind him out of habit, ever the lawyer, concerned with propriety even now. Then he trudged to his car and drove off, leaving the house silent. The house. My house, for now. Soon to be someone else's. I pulled out from my hiding spot and onto the road, heading in the opposite direction to avoid passing them. I didn't go far. At a quiet park a few miles away, I parked under a shady oak and simply rested my head against the steering wheel for a long moment, eyes closed. It was done. In the span of less than a day, I had unraveled my old life, liquidated assets, set in motion the sale of my home, severed ties with my only children. All in response to an unimaginable betrayal that was entirely of their making. Bittersweet doesn't begin to cover the feeling in my soul. It was as if I had performed an amputation on myself, cut out the gangrenous limb to save the body. It was the right choice for survival, but I knew I would forever feel the phantom pain of that lost limb. After some time, I sat up and looked around the park. A few children were playing on a distant playground while parents watched. A couple strolled along a path hand in hand. A jogger trotted by with a dog. Life going on, normal and gentle, while mine had changed irrevocably. I reached over to the passenger seat where I'd placed the one thing that mattered to me now, a framed photograph of Margaret and me on our 30th anniversary, both of us laughing as we danced in the backyard. One of the happiest days of my life. I picked it up and gazed at it. Margaret's face beamed back, full of love and mirth. What would she think of all this? Would she have been horrified at what our children attempted? Undoubtedly. Would she have agreed with how I retaliated? I wasn't sure. She had a forgiving heart, sometimes to a fault. But she also had a spine of steel when it came to principles. She would not have tolerated treachery lightly. I did what I had to, Maggie, I whispered, my voice rough in the quiet. It wasn't how I wanted things, but they gave me no choice. A breeze rustled the oak leaves above, and I could almost imagine her voice in it. Telling me I'd done well to stand up for myself, but that she was sorry it had come to this. I set the photo down gently. From the glove compartment, I retrieved a half-full bottle of her favorite perfume that I'd kept all these years. Lavender and vanilla. I spritzed a tiny bit into the air, and the scent flooded the car, wrapping me in her memory. Pulling out my phone, I opened a secure messaging app I'd installed recently. In it was only one contact, Emily's new number on the little smartphone I'd given her for her birthday. My thumbs hovered a moment, then I typed. "Hi sweetheart. I just want you to know I'm okay. I love you so much. Always remember that." I hit send. I doubted I'd get a reply. Her parents would surely confiscate her phone once they realized I'd be in touch. But I wanted some record for her that I was thinking of her and that none of this was her fault. My brave little granddaughter had likely saved me without fully understanding it. If she hadn't warned me, I might be waking up today in a very different scenario, possibly signing my life away in that brunch ambush. I owed her more than a text. One day, if and when it was feasible, I'd do something to ensure her life, and any other grandkids, would benefit from what I built, even if her parents would not. I thought about my next steps. I would stay at a hotel for a few nights, until I could secure a new apartment or living arrangement. I wasn't ready for one of those seniors communities yet, but maybe a nice small condo downtown where I could walk to shops and enjoy some independence. The world was strangely open to me now. For so long, my future had been anchored around being dad, being a part of my children's lives, and eventually leaving everything to them. That vision was gone. I was free, but free in a way that felt untethered, even lonely. Still, there was a hint of empowerment in that freedom. At 72, I was starting over in a sense. It wasn't how I'd planned it, but it was on my terms. That had to count for something. I rolled down the car window and let the crisp autumn air wash over me. In the distance, a flock of geese honked as they flew, probably starting their migration south. Seasons changing, life moving forward. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a small object I'd taken from the house, Margaret's wedding ring. She had been wearing it when she died, and I'd kept it on my nightstand since. I slipped it onto my pinky for now, a talisman of her presence. "I won, honey," I said softly to the ring in the open air. "It's a hollow victory, but I won. They won't hurt us anymore." In the rustling leaves, I almost heard her response in my mind, "I'm proud of you, Frank. It's going to be okay." I closed my eyes and let a few more tears fall, grieving and healing all at once. When I finally started the car and pulled away from the park, I felt a curious calm settle over me. Yes, I had paid dearly to teach my children this lesson about betrayal. I might have lost them in the process, but perhaps I never truly had them as I thought. Not the people they became. What I did have was myself, my dignity, my autonomy, my memories, and whatever time was left to me to live life as I chose. Those were things no one could steal from me now. As I drove toward an uncertain yet self-defined future, I realized that the cost of my children's treachery had indeed been steep. But the value of having stood up for myself, of refusing to be a victim, those were worth it. It was a bittersweet triumph. I had won my freedom, but at a price. Yet as the city skyline came into view, glowing under the midday sun, I felt the first glimmer of peace that I'd felt in years. I was no longer anyone's burden. I was my own man again. With my own money. My own choices. And my own future stretching ahead like an open road. Bittersweet, yes. But in that moment, tasting both the salt of my tears and the sweetness of hard-won liberation, I felt something unexpected. I felt free.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.